possession, but these protections were not particularly protective, and much of the Indian land was purchased either by white settlers or by speculators. After the passage of the Dawes Act, Indians lost 86 million of the 138 million acres of land in their possession. Oh boy, it's time for the mystery document. The rules here are simple. I guess the author of the mystery document, and then you get to see me get shocked when I'm wrong. All right. I have seen the great father chief, the next great chief, the commissioner chief, the law chief, and many other law chiefs, and they all say they are my friends and that I shall have justice. But while all their mouths talk right, I do not understand why nothing is done for my people. I have heard talk and talk, but nothing is done. Words do not pay for my dead people. They do not pay for my country now overrun by white men. They do not protect my father's grave. Good words will not give my people a home where they can live in peace and take care of themselves. I am tired of talk that comes to nothing. It makes my heart sick when I remember all the good words and all the broken promises. I mean, that could be almost any American Indian leader. This is totally unfair, Stan. All I really know about this is that the great father chief is the president. I mean, it could be any of a dozen people. How about if I say the name in 10 seconds, I don't get punished? And start. Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, Geronimo, Chief Bigfoot, Keokuk, Chief Oshkosh, Chief Joseph, Chief... Oh, yes, yes! And now let us move from tragedy to tragedy. So if you're thinking that it couldn't get worse for the Native Americans, it did. After killing off the buffalo, taking their land, and forcing Indians onto reservations, the Bureau of Indian Affairs instituted a policy that amounted to cultural genocide. It set up boarding schools, the most famous of which was in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, where Indian children were forcefully removed from their families to be civilized. This meant teaching them English, taking away their clothes, their names, and their family connections. The idea, put succinctly, was to, quote, kill the Indian, save the man. Now, the U.S. wasn't the only nation busy subjugating its indigenous inhabitants and putting them on reservations in the late 19th century. Like, something similar was happening in South Africa, in Chile, and even to First Peoples in Canada. And you're usually so good, Canada, although the slower pace of Western settlement meant that there was much less bloodshed, so another point to Canada. And as bad as the American boarding school policy was, at least it was short-lived compared with Australia's policy of removing Aboriginal children from families and placing them with white foster families, which lasted until the 1970s. All right, Dan, we need to cheer this episode up. Let's talk about cowboys. The Marlboro man riding the range, herding cows and smoking, solitary in the saddle, alone in his emphysema. Surely that is the actual West, the men and women, but mostly men, who stood apart from the industrializing country as the last of Jefferson's rugged individuals. But no. Once again, we have the railroad to thank for our image of the cowboy. Like those massive cattle drives of millions of cows across open range Texas. Yeah, they ended at towns like Abilene and Wichita and Dodge City because that's where the railheads were. Without railroads, cowboys would have just driven their cattle in endless circles, and without industrial meat processing, there wouldn't have been a market for all that beef. And it was a lot of beef, if you know what I'm talking about. I'm actually talking about beef. By the mid-1880s, the days of open-range ranching were coming to an end as ranchers began to enclose more and more land and set up their businesses closer to, you guessed it, railroad stations. There are also quite a few things about